Hi, so one of the tools we chose to use to build the guidance proof of concept was called Subversion, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how this works and how it helps. So I'm going to cover a few concepts first: version control, configuration management, publication and release, and team working, and then I'm going to give a quick demo of how Subversion and Madcat Flare work together and how a publishing workflow might kind of work in principle. So version control. So suppose we've got some text and we've got that stored away in a file somewhere, and then we go and change the text in that file and we want to save it away somewhere. So we could just overwrite the original file, but if we do that we lose the history, we lose the ability to revert back to the previous version if we find that there's something wrong. So one obvious alternative is to save it to a different file. So we've got some history and we can revert, but these files aren't intrinsically linked, so we can't from the system actually do anything to discover that history other than maybe by file naming convention. And also we can't be sure that everybody is working from the same version of the file, or that everybody knows which the most recent version of the file is. So an alternative is to use a version control system, and that allows us to save the change text back to effectively the original file with the same name, and the system then maintains where the previous version is, allowing us to revert to that, and it also allows us to know what the latest version is, so we can be sure that everybody is working off the same version, and also it allows us to keep metadata about the history of the revision, so that history of the file, so that we know who did what. So the configuration control problem comes when we've got quite a lot of files that actually combine together to make a system, and in some cases this may be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of files that make one system, and those files can be changing at different rates. And so suppose we start off with a set of files, we edit them, and at some point we decide that that system is now ready for publication to a wider audience, and so we want to take a snapshot of what the latest version is for that release. So we want to actually say, right, these versions of these files form our first publication, but we may have a publication workflow where people go through approval before it's finally published, and during that period people might be carrying on editing those files, but we need to have our snapshot to work from, so we know exactly what that publication is. And then at some point later we want to do a new release of that system, but we may not want to use the latest version of all the files, because some of them may be long-term edits that might not be appropriate to publish yet, and whereas others might need to get into the system urgently, and so we want to take a snapshot of a different set of versions of the file for publication, but we also want to maintain the history of which versions were in the previous release, so we can revert to that if that becomes necessary. And then we need to be able to carry on editing the files into the future. So before I move on to team working, I want to talk a little bit about how Subversion works. So imagine we've got a directory system, a sequence of files, a set of files, and what Subversion allows us to do is check in, take a snapshot of that whole set of files and call that a version, and then we can take a working copy of that from the Subversion database onto our own computer and we can edit it, and then at some point when we decide this is got to a significant point, we can take another snapshot of that file system and save it back to Subversion, and then we can carry on editing and again save it back, save a new snapshot of the directory or the file system back to Subversion. And the important thing to note here is that Subversion is doing version control not on the individual files but on the whole of the file system, and that we can revert back to previous versions, so we can take a working copy not just from the latest version but from a previous version of that file system and recreate it as it was at some point in the past. But this also allows us to do other things, because we can then modify that working version and we can take a snapshot of that, effectively giving us two different versions of the file set that we can then carry on and edit independently, and then again save snapshots of those versions back into the Subversion database. And beyond that, Subversion also gives us tools to merge those back together again if at some time in the future that becomes the appropriate thing to do. So one of the things that this enables is team working. So suppose we have a file set in Subversion at version N and two authors, Alex and Alison. They can both take working copies of the file set to their own computers and can independently make changes, editing files, adding files, even working on the same file. And then let's say Alex feels his changes are finished. He can save those back into Subversion, where they can be reviewed and even published. And Alison, if she wishes, can synchronize her working copy with what's in Subversion, so she has both Alex's changes and her own. And if there are any conflicts between them, she has the opportunity to resolve them. But she can then carry on working with the file set, making her changes without impacting what has been published in Subversion. And then when she feels her changes are ready, she can save them back to Subversion, making yet another version of the file set. And then if Alex wants to make more changes, he can synchronize his working copy to Subversion so that he's starting from the latest version. So let's look at how Subversion works with Madcap. So if we go into the team site, we'll see that we've got several guidance sites that are part of the prototype and that have been produced from the same Madcap source. And I'm just going to pull up two of those, the live version of the caseworker site and the review version of the same site. And the idea is that any changes would be published first to the review site where they could be checked, and if they're found to be okay, they could then be published to the live site. So if I can just find a page I can use as an example, I'm pulling up the same page from both sites, and we'll see that they're pretty much the same, and they both contain this spurious text, John P. was here. So now if we go and pull up Madcap, and we can find that text and we can remove it, we save the file and then check it back into Subversion. And I'll just annotate that with a comment that we'll see later on. So that's that checked back in, but we haven't built anything yet, and so if we go and look at the pages on both sites, we'll see that nothing has changed yet. So I just wanted to now go and look at what's happening in Subversion. So this is the Subversion repository, and we'll see that at the top level we've got three folders: authoring, reviewing and publishing. And if we go into the authoring folder, we'll see that we've got all the Madcap project. So there's Ali's change of address project, Alkan's restrictions project, and if we go into here, the one where I just saved the change and find that file, we'll see that the spurious comment has gone. And if we look at the revision log, we'll see the annotation I just made when I did the check-in, and we'll see that I didn't quite manage to get this video done in one take and did various other check-ins this afternoon. And from here we can go in and we can look at what the various versions of this file were historically. We can look at the differences between those files, and we can see who changed what. So when I come to reviewing this, the first thing I want to do is to take a snapshot of the whole of the authoring folder so that any further changes that the authors make won't be reflected in what eventually gets published. So if I run this script, and I'll name the snapshot John P, and the script will then go ahead and take that snapshot and put it into the reviewing folder, and then it will build the reviewing website. So if we look in the reviewing folder in the Subversion repository, and if I can just bring this quickly up to date, do a quick refresh, we'll see that in that reviewing folder there is now a snapshot called John P, and that in that snapshot there is all the files that also exist in the authoring folder. And the script will now go ahead and it will build the review website. So if we just wait a second for that to complete. Okay, so that's done. So if we now look at the reviewing website, we'll see that the refresh that, see that the spurious text has disappeared. But if we go and refresh the page on the live website, we'll see that it's still there. So providing we think that the changes in the reviewing website are okay, the next stage is to run another script which will take a snapshot of what's in the reviewing folder and put that into the publishing folder, and then build the live website. So this is the script running, it's just taking the snapshot. So if we look again in the Subversion repository and just bring things up to date, we'll see that there is now a folder or a snapshot called John P in the publishing folder, and we can see here that there's a snapshot that's been taken every time we've done a publishing action, and so we can actually go and look at what was published at any point in time, or even revert to one of those previous versions, and we can examine history and we can see who did what when. So if I just wait for the script to finish the build again, we can go and refresh the live website and we'll see that the spurious text has disappeared.